The hook. Elena's knees nearly buckled as Adrian's lips moved against hers, the taste of rain and something darker, expensive whiskey perhaps, flooding her senses. The kiss was nothing like Marcus's careful pecks, nothing like the sanitized affection she'd grown accustomed to. This was fire and possession, claiming and challenge all rolled into one breathtaking moment that made her forget she was standing in a downpour on a Seattle sidewalk. When Adrian finally pulled back, his hands still framing her face, Elena caught a glimpse of Marcus over his shoulder. Her ex-fiancé stood frozen in his apartment doorway, mouth agape, the warm light from inside casting him in golden relief while they remained shrouded in shadow and rain. For a fleeting moment, she felt a savage satisfaction at the shock written across his features. "Get in the car," Adrian murmured against her ear, his voice a low rumble that seemed to vibrate through her chest. "You're soaked." Elena blinked, the spell breaking enough for reality to crash back in. What was she doing? She barely knew this man. Yes, she'd saved his life 3 months ago when the paramedics wheeled him into her ER, his body broken from what the police had called a freak accident. And yes, he'd sent flowers afterward, tasteful arrangements that arrived weekly with cards signed simply AC. But that didn't mean she should be letting him kiss her senseless in front of the man who just shattered her world. "I can't," she started. But Adrian was already guiding her toward the sleek BMW, his hand warm and steady against the small of her back. "You can," he said with quiet authority, "and you will, because standing here arguing with a man who just abandoned his pregnant fiancée isn't going to change anything." The words hit like a physical blow. Pregnant fiancée. That's what she'd been 10 minutes ago. Now she was just, what? A woman carrying a baby that apparently wasn't her ex's, though she had no idea how that was possible. The timeline didn't make sense. She'd been faithful to Marcus, hadn't so much as looked at another man in the 2 years they'd been together. Marcus's voice cut through the rain, sharp with something that might have been regret. "Wait, we need to talk about this. The baby is mine," she said without turning around, surprised by the steadiness in her voice. "That's all that matters now." Adrian opened the passenger door, and Elena found herself sliding into buttery leather seats that probably cost more than her monthly rent. The interior smelled like expensive cologne and new car, a stark contrast to Marcus's aging Honda with its coffee stains and medical journals scattered across the back seat. As Adrian settled into the driver's seat, Elena caught her reflection in the side mirror. Her dark hair was plastered to her skull, mascara smudged beneath her brown eyes, and her scrubs were soaked through. She looked like exactly what she was, a woman whose life had just imploded. "How did you know where to find me?" she asked, as Adrian pulled away from the curb, leaving Marcus standing alone in his doorway. Lucky timing. His smile was enigmatic, hands steady on the wheel as they navigated the narrow Capitol Hill streets. "I was in the neighborhood for a business meeting. Saw you standing in the rain and thought you might need a rescue." Elena studied his profile in the dim light from the dashboard. Sharp cheekbones, a strong jaw with the shadow of evening stubble, and those dark eyes that seemed to see too much. He was handsome in a dangerous way that should have sent warning bells ringing through her head. Instead, she felt an odd sense of safety settling over her, as if she'd found shelter in the eye of a storm. "I don't need rescuing," she said automatically, the words a reflex born from years of fierce independence. "Of course not." Adrian's tone was gently mocking. "That's why you were standing in a thunderstorm at 10 o'clock at night, 6 months pregnant, looking like your world just ended." "My world didn't end," Elena protested, even as she pressed a protective hand to her barely visible bump. "It just shifted." "Shifted," Adrian repeated, as if tasting the word. "I like that. Much more optimistic than imploded." Despite everything, Elena found herself almost smiling. There was something about this man that drew her in, made her want to lean into his confidence and let him shoulder some of the weight she'd been carrying alone for so long. It was a dangerous impulse, one that went against every lesson she'd learned about relying on others. "Where are we going?" she asked as the city lights blurred past her window. "Somewhere warm and dry," Adrian said. somewhere you can think clearly without the ghost of your past breathing down your neck. Elena closed her eyes and let the car's warmth seep into her bones. Tomorrow, she'd have to face the wreckage of her life. Tonight, she was content to disappear into the darkness with a man who kissed like he owned the world. The ordinary world. Elena woke to unfamiliar silence. No blaring alarm at 5:30. No Marcus's off-key humming from the shower. No grinding of the ancient coffee maker that she'd been meaning to replace for months. Just blessed, uninterrupted quiet that felt both foreign and oddly comforting. She kept her eyes closed, cataloguing the differences. The mattress beneath her was firmer than the one she had shared with Marcus. The sheets were Egyptian cotton, not the discount linens from Target, and there was no antiseptic hospital smell clinging to her scrubs because her scrubs were... Where exactly? Memory crashed back in fragments. The rain, Marcus's devastating confession, Adrian's unexpected kiss, the drive through Seattle's neon-lit streets that had ended at a downtown hotel she'd never be able to afford on her physician's salary. Elena's eyes snapped open to find herself staring at an unfamiliar ceiling painted in soft morning light. She was wearing an oversized hotel bathrobe, her damp clothes from the night before nowhere to be seen. Panic fluttered in her chest before she registered the sound of a shower running in the adjoining bathroom and a man's voice speaking in low, measured tones. A phone call. She sat up carefully, one hand instinctively moving to her belly. The baby was fine, of course. At 6 months, she'd learned to distinguish between her own anxiety and actual cause for concern. Still, the gesture brought comfort, a reminder that whatever chaos surrounded her, she wasn't truly alone. The room was elegant in that understated way only genuine luxury could achieve. Floor-to-ceiling windows offered a panoramic view of Elliott Bay, where ferries moved like toys across steel-grey water. Her phone, somehow retrieved from her purse, showed 17 missed calls from Marcus and 43 text messages she had no intention of reading. What she did read made her stomach drop. 8 missed calls from Seattle General's ER director and a text from her attending physician, Dr. Sarah Chen, marked urgent. "Where are you? Your shift started an hour ago. Marcus called looking for you. Call me back, now." Elena closed her eyes, the weight of her normal life pressing down like a physical force. Her shift, her patients, her responsibilities. The carefully constructed routine that had kept her sane for the past 8 years was still there, still demanding her attention, even as her personal world had shifted on its axis. She'd built her life around work because work was reliable. Patients needed healing, and she could provide it. The ER was chaos, but it was controlled chaos. The kind where her skills mattered, where she could make a difference, where she was valued for more than her ability to smile and nod and pretend everything was fine. Unlike her relationship with Marcus, apparently. The bathroom door opened, and Adrian emerged in a cloud of steam, hair damp, wearing a charcoal suit that probably cost more than most people's monthly salary. He looked like he'd stepped off the cover of Forbes, not like a man who'd spent the night playing white knight to a woman whose life had imploded on a Capitol Hill sidewalk. "You're awake," he said, his tone carefully neutral. "How are you feeling?" "Like I need to get to work." Elena swung her legs over the side of the bed, grateful when the room didn't spin. "What time is it?" "Nearly 10. Adrian was watching her with those dark eyes, as if she were a puzzle he was trying to solve. "I took the liberty of having your clothes cleaned. They should be ready in an hour." An hour! Elena's mind raced through the implications. She was already late for her shift, would have to explain her absence, would have to face the questions and concerned looks and the inevitable hospital gossip mill that turned personal drama into entertainment. More than that, she'd have to rebuild her life from the ground up. Find a new apartment. The lease was in Marcus's name. Separate their bank accounts. Figure out how to raise a baby alone. The thought should have terrified her, but instead she felt a strange lightness, as if a weight she hadn't realized she'd been carrying had suddenly lifted. "You don't have to stay," she said, surprising herself with the steadiness of her voice. "Thank you for last night, but I can take care of myself from here." I'm sure you can. Adrian moved to the windows, hands clasped behind his back. You've been taking care of yourself for a long time, haven't you? There was something in his tone that made her study his profile more carefully. What's that supposed to mean? Nothing profound, just an observation. He turned back to her, and for a moment she caught something in his expression. Hunger, maybe, or satisfaction. It was gone so quickly she might have imagined it. Elena, may I ask you something? She nodded, though warning bells were finally starting to chime in the back of her mind. Are you happy? The question hung between them, simple and devastating. Elena opened her mouth to give the automatic yes, then stopped. Was she happy? Or was she just settled? The question echoed in the elegant hotel room, bouncing off the floor-to-ceiling windows and settling somewhere deep in Elena's chest, where she'd buried all the truths she'd been too afraid to examine. Was she happy? The automatic response died on her lips as she really considered it for the first time in years. I don't know, she admitted, the words barely above a whisper. I thought I was, but maybe I was just comfortable. Adrian nodded as if this confirmed something he'd suspected all along. He reached into his jacket pocket and withdrew a sleek black phone, checking something on the screen with the casual efficiency of a man accustomed to managing multiple crises simultaneously. There's something you should see, he said, his tone shifting to something more serious. I didn't want to show you last night. You'd been through enough. But you deserve to know what kind of man you were planning to marry. Elena's stomach tightened. What are you talking about? Instead of answering, Adrian pulled up something on his phone and handed it to her. The screen showed a series of text messages, and it took Elena a moment to recognize Marcus's number. Her breath caught as she read the timestamps. These messages had been sent 3 weeks ago, long before their confrontation in the rain. Can't do this anymore. The baby changes everything. You don't understand the pressure I'm under. My family, the practice, everything I've worked for. She's a good woman, but I never planned on this. Not now. I need an exit strategy. Elena's hands began to tremble. The messages continued, each one a dagger to the illusion she'd maintained about their relationship. Marcus hadn't just discovered doubts about the baby's parentage last night. He'd been planning to leave her for weeks. The shock and pain on his face when he'd confronted her had been an act, a carefully orchestrated performance designed to make her the villain in their story. Who was he texting? She asked, though part of her didn't want to know. A friend of mine. Someone Marcus approached for advice about ending things with you. Adrian's voice was carefully controlled. He'd been looking for an excuse to leave Elena. The paternity question was just convenient timing. The phone slipped from Elena's nerveless fingers, clattering onto the marble floor. She felt as if she were drowning again, but this time there was no rain to blame for the water in her eyes. 3 weeks. He'd been planning to abandon her for 3 weeks, while she'd been excitedly planning their wedding, picking out nursery colors, imagining their future together. I'm sorry, Adrian said, and his voice held genuine regret. I know this is painful, but I thought you should know that none of this was your fault. Marcus made his choice long before last night. Elena wrapped her arms around herself, the hotel bathrobe suddenly feeling inadequate against the chill that had nothing to do with Seattle's October weather. Why are you showing me this? What do you want from me? Adrian moved closer, stopping just at the edge of her personal space. I want to offer you a choice. What kind of choice? The kind that changes everything. He gestured toward the windows, toward the city sprawling below them. You could go back to your old life. Return to the hospital, explain away your absence, find a new apartment, start over as a single mother. It's a perfectly respectable path. Or you could come with me. Elena blinked, certain she'd misheard. Come with you where? I'm flying to Vancouver this afternoon for a series of business meetings. From there, London, then Dubai. I'll be gone for 3 months. Adrian's dark eyes held hers steadily. Come with me, Elena. See the world. Give yourself time to heal away from all of this. The offer hung between them like a lifeline thrown to a drowning woman. 3 months away from Seattle, from the hospital gossip, from the wreckage of her life with Marcus. 3 months to figure out who she was when she wasn't Dr. Elena Vasquez, the competent emergency physician who had everything under control. "I can't just disappear," she protested, even as part of her was already imagining it. "I have responsibilities, patients, my job. Your job will survive without you for 3 months. Your patients will be fine." Adrian's voice was persuasive, hypnotic almost. "But will you be fine if you stay here and try to pretend none of this happened?" Elena's phone buzzed again with another message from the hospital. Dr. Chen would be furious. There would be paperwork, explanations, possible disciplinary action. She'd never missed a shift without notice in 8 years of practice. But then she thought about facing Marcus in the hospital cafeteria, about the pitying looks from colleagues who'd heard about their broken engagement, about raising a baby alone in the city where everyone knew her as half of a couple that no longer existed. What would I tell people? The truth, that you needed time away to figure things out. Adrian stepped closer, and she caught the scent of his cologne, something expensive and masculine that made her pulse quicken despite everything. "Elena, when was the last time you did something just for yourself?" The question hit like a physical blow because she couldn't remember. Every decision she'd made for years had been filtered through other people's needs, other people's expectations. Marcus's career goals, her patients' emergencies, her colleagues' schedules, even the pregnancy, which should have been about her and her baby, had somehow become about Marcus's timeline, Marcus's comfort level, Marcus's family's expectations. "I need to think," she said. "Of course," Adrian smiled, and something about it made her pulse race. "Take all the time you need." "But Elena?" "Yes, some choices can't wait forever." The weight of Adrian's words settled over Elena like a heavy blanket, suffocating in its implications. She stood frozen in the middle of the hotel room, acutely aware of the distance between her old life and this strange new reality, where mysterious billionaires offered impossible escapes from carefully constructed routines. A phone buzzed again. Another message from the hospital. Elena stared at the screen, watching the notification banner appear and disappear, and felt something twist painfully in her chest. 8 years. 8 years of showing up, being reliable, being the doctor everyone could count on. The thought of walking away from that felt like stepping off a cliff blindfolded. "You're scared," Adrian observed, his voice gentle but penetrating. Elena's head snapped up. "I'm not scared. I'm being practical. People don't just disappear for 3 months because a stranger offers them a trip around the world. Don't they?" Adrian moved to the windows again, his silhouette dark against the grey Seattle morning. "Seems to me you've been disappearing a little more each day for years. Into your work, into other people's expectations. At least this would be a conscious choice." The words hit too close to home, and Elena felt her defenses rising. "You don't know anything about my life. I know you saved mine." Adrian turned back to her, something intense flickering in his dark eyes. 3 months ago, when they wheeled me into your ER, you spent 6 hours putting me back together. You could have handed me off to another surgeon, but you didn't. You stayed." Elena remembered that night with crystalline clarity. The car accident had been devastating. Multiple fractures, internal bleeding, touch and go for hours. She'd worked on trauma cases before, but something about Adrian Cross had made her fight harder, stay longer, refuse to give up even when the odds looked impossible. "That's my job," she said weakly. "No, that was you caring about someone you'd never met. That was you choosing to save a life even when it cost you 12 hours straight on your feet and a formal reprimand for ignoring shift protocols." Adrian's voice dropped lower, more intimate. "Tell me, Elena, when was the last time someone fought that hard for you?" The question landed like a physical blow. Elena sank down onto the edge of the bed, her hands instinctively moving to cradle her belly. When was the last time? Certainly not Marcus, who'd been planning his exit strategy while she'd been planning their future. Not her colleagues, who valued her competence more than her well-being, not even herself. When had she last fought for what she wanted instead of what everyone expected her to want? "This is crazy," she whispered. "I don't even know you. You know I'm alive because of your skill and dedication. You know I'm grateful enough to offer you something no one else has, complete freedom from all of this for as long as you need it." Adrian's voice was persuasive, seductive almost. "What else do you need to know?" "Everything," Elena's rational mind screamed. His last name, his business, why he was in that car accident, why he's so interested in helping a woman he barely knows. But her rational mind had been guiding her decisions for 32 years, and where had it gotten her? Standing in a hotel room in a bathrobe, pregnant and abandoned, questioning every choice she'd ever made. Her phone rang, Dr. Chen's name flashing on the screen. Elena stared at it, paralyzed by indecision. Answer and face the consequences of her absence, the questions about Marcus, the inevitable return to a life that felt increasingly like a cage, or let it ring and step into the unknown with a man who might be her salvation or her destruction. "They need me," she said, but even to her own ears the words sounded hollow. "Do they? Or do they need what you provide for them?" Adrian's question was quiet, devastating in its accuracy. "There's a difference between being needed and being valued, Elena. Between being indispensable and being appreciated." The phone stopped ringing, then immediately started again. Elena felt tears burning behind her eyes as the full weight of her isolation crashed over her. She was surrounded by people who needed her medical skills, her reliability, her willingness to sacrifice her own needs for theirs. But who among them would fight for her the way she'd fought for Adrian that night in the ER? What if something goes wrong with the baby? The question escaped before she could stop it, revealing the fear that lived beneath every other concern. "Then you'll be with someone who owes you his life and has the resources to get you the best medical care in the world." Adrian's answer was immediate, confident. "Elena, staying here doesn't guarantee safety. It only guarantees more of the same." The phone rang again. Dr. Chen's name. Elena's finger hovered over the answer button, her entire future balanced on this single moment of choice. Stay and rebuild the ruins of her carefully planned life, or leap into the unknown with a man whose motivations she couldn't begin to understand. Some choices can't wait forever, Adrian had said, and Elena was beginning to understand that he was right. This moment wouldn't come again. Elena's finger trembled over the phone screen as Dr. Chen's name flashed insistently. The sound seemed to echo off the hotel room's marble surfaces, each ring a chain pulling her back toward the life she'd built so carefully, so deliberately. The life that had just revealed itself to be a beautiful lie. She declined the call. The silence that followed felt monumental, as if she'd just severed an anchor rope and was now drifting into uncharted waters. Adrian said nothing, but she could feel his attention focused on her like a laser, waiting to see which version of herself would emerge from this moment. "If I go with you," Elena said slowly, each word feeling foreign on her tongue, "what exactly are you offering?" "Time," Adrian replied without hesitation. "Space to breathe, to figure out who you are when you're not constantly saving other people." He moved closer. Close enough that she could see the flecks of gold in his dark eyes. No expectations, no demands. Just freedom to be Elena Vasquez, the woman, instead of Dr. Vasquez, the emergency physician. The distinction hit her like a revelation. When had she last been just Elena? Not the competent doctor, not Marcus's fiancé, not the reliable colleague who never said no to extra shifts, just herself. Whoever that was anymore. Her phone buzzed with a text message. Then another. The outside world pressing in, demanding explanations, accountability, the return of the woman who always had her life perfectly under control. "I'd need to call the hospital," she heard herself saying, as if from a great distance. "Arrange a leave of absence. There are protocols already handled," Adrian said quietly. Elena's eyes snapped to his. "What do you mean, already handled?" I took the liberty of having my assistant contact the hospital administration this morning. Explained that Dr. Elena Vasquez required immediate extended leave due to a family emergency. Your department head was very understanding, particularly when we mentioned the substantial donation Cross Industries would be making to the new trauma wing. The casual way he said it, the assumption, the manipulation disguised as assistance, should have infuriated her. Instead, Elena felt a strange sense of relief wash over her. The decision was being taken out of her hands, lifted from shoulders that had carried the weight of everyone else's needs for so long she'd forgotten what it felt like to stand upright. "You were that certain I'd say yes?" she asked. "I was that certain you needed someone to give you permission to save yourself for once." Adrian's voice was soft, hypnotic. "Elena, 3 months ago you fought for my life when no one else believed it was worth saving. Let me return the favor." The parallel he drew wasn't lost on her. In the ER that night, she'd seen something in Adrian worth fighting for, even when the monitors flatlined, even when the attending physician recommended calling time of death. Now he was seeing something in her worth saving, something she couldn't quite see herself. Her phone rang again. This time it was Marcus. Elena stared at his name on the screen, remembering the man who'd proposed to her 6 months ago with tears in his eyes, promising forever. The same man who'd been planning his exit strategy for weeks while she'd been picking out baby cribs and imagining their future together. The man who'd made her doubt her own worth with a handful of cruel words spoken in the rain. She declined the call and immediately blocked his number. "When do we leave?" she asked. The transformation in Adrian's face was subtle but unmistakable. Satisfaction, triumph, something darker she couldn't quite identify. It should have worried her, but Elena found she was beyond caring about should-haves and what-ifs. For the first time in her adult life, she was choosing the unknown over the safe path. "My plane leaves at 3, Adrian said, his voice carefully neutral despite the victory she'd glimpsed in his expression. "That gives us enough time to collect your things and handle any remaining details." "I don't have a passport with me," Elena realized suddenly, the practical concerns of spontaneous international travel hitting her. "Already arranged. My assistant expedited a replacement. Apparently you reported yours lost last month." Adrian's smile was enigmatic. "She's remarkably efficient at solving problems before they arise." Elena didn't remember reporting her passport lost, but then again, the past few months had been a blur of wedding planning and pregnancy symptoms. Maybe she had, and forgotten. It seemed impossible that such things could be arranged so quickly, but she supposed when you had Adrian's resources, impossible became merely expensive. Her old self, Dr. Elena Vasquez, the woman who planned everything 3 steps ahead, would have demanded explanations, insisted on handling her own affairs. But that woman had also trusted Marcus completely, had built her entire future on a foundation of lies and manipulation. Maybe it was time to trust someone new. Maybe it was time to trust herself enough to take the leap. 3 o'clock, she repeated, tasting the words like a foreign language. "I guess I'm crossing more than just international borders today." "We both are," Adrian said, and something in his tone suggested layers of meaning she didn't yet understand. The threshold had been crossed. There was no going back now. The reality of her decision hit Elena like a cold wave as they stepped out of the hotel elevator into the marble-clad lobby. She'd made impulsive choices before, choosing emergency medicine over the safer path of family practice, moving to Seattle for her residency, but nothing like this. Nothing that felt so much like stepping off the edge of the known world. "Your apartment first," Adrian said, his hand settling at the small of her back as he guided her toward the revolving doors. The gesture was proprietary, protective, and Elena found herself torn between comfort and unease at how natural it felt. "We'll need to move quickly. International departures require extra time." The ride to Capitol Hill passed in a blur of grey October streets and autumn rain. Elena watched familiar landmarks slide past the town car's tinted windows, the coffee shop where she'd studied for her medical boards, the bookstore where she and Marcus had browsed for hours on lazy Sunday afternoons, the park where he'd proposed. Each sight felt like viewing artifacts from someone else's life. "You're having second thoughts," Adrian observed, his voice cutting through her melancholy. "Wouldn't you?" "No." His answer was immediate, certain. "But then, I learned a long time ago that hesitation is just fear wearing a reasonable mask." Elena turned to study his profile, the sharp angles of his jaw, the way his dark hair caught the dim light filtering through the rain-streaked windows. "What happened to you? In the accident, I mean. You never told me how you ended up wrapped around that tree on Highway 99. Something shifted in Adrian's expression, a barely perceptible tightening around his eyes. Wrong place, wrong time. Sometimes life is that simple. The deflection was smooth, practiced, but Elena had spent years reading people in crisis. Adrian Cross was hiding something, just as Marcus had hidden his growing dissatisfaction, just as she'd been hiding her own growing sense of suffocation in her perfectly planned life. Maybe they were all just collections of secrets wearing public faces. Her apartment building came into view, and Elena felt her chest constrict. She'd lived here for 4 years, had planned to give notice next month when she moved into Marcus' larger place after the wedding. Now she was leaving indefinitely with a man she barely knew, and somehow that felt more real than any of the careful plans she'd made with her ex-fiancé. 20 minutes, Adrian said, as they pulled up to the curb. "Pack light. Anything you need can be purchased along the way." The efficiency of it should have bothered her, but Elena found herself grateful for the time constraint. Too long to think would only invite paralysis, and she'd spent enough years overthinking every decision. She grabbed her keys and headed for the entrance, Adrian close behind. "You don't need to come up," she said, suddenly aware that her apartment would reveal things about her she wasn't ready to share, the medical textbooks that served as decoration, the sparse personal touches that spoke to a life lived primarily at the hospital, the half-packed wedding gifts she hadn't had the heart to return. "I insist," Adrian replied, and there was something in his tone that brooked no argument. "Consider it protection against any unexpected visitors." Elena's stomach clenched at the thought of running into him, of having to explain or defend or justify. Adrian's presence would serve as both shield and statement. She wasn't alone, wasn't the abandoned woman Marcus had left standing in the rain. Her apartment felt foreign as she unlocked the door, as if she were visiting someone else's life. The carefully coordinated furniture, the medical journals arranged just so on the coffee table, the framed photo of her and Marcus from last Christmas that she should have taken down but hadn't found the strength to touch. It all belonged to a woman who'd believed in forever, who'd thought she had everything figured out. "Efficient," Adrian commented, taking in the space with an appraising eye. "Very controlled." "Is that criticism?" "Observation." He moved to the window that overlooked the street, his posture alert, watchful. "Though I do wonder what this place would look like if Elena Vasquez, the woman, lived here, instead of Dr. Vasquez, the physician." The distinction he kept drawing bothered her because it felt accurate. When had she last bought something impractical, decorative, purely because it brought her joy? When had she chosen comfort over function, beauty over utility? "I'll just grab some things," she said, escaping to her bedroom before he could see how his words affected her. 20 minutes. She pulled a suitcase from her closet and began throwing clothes inside. Practical pieces, work-appropriate blazers, the kind of wardrobe that could transition from hospital to dinner meetings without thought. Then she paused, her hand hovering over a red dress she'd bought on impulse years ago and never worn. It was impractical, beautiful, completely unlike anything Dr. Vasquez would choose. Elena grabbed it and stuffed it into the suitcase. She was Elena Vasquez, the woman now, whatever that meant. Time to find out. Back in the living room, Elena found Adrian standing motionless by her bookshelf, his attention fixed on something that made her blood freeze. In his hands was the ultrasound photo from her 20-week appointment, the one she'd propped against a medical journal and forgotten about in the chaos of Marcus's betrayal. 6 months along, he said without looking up, his voice carrying an odd note she couldn't identify. "Do you know what you're having?" "A girl." The words came out smaller than she'd intended. Something about the way he held the photo, the careful reverence in his touch, made her suddenly self-conscious about the life growing inside her. "Beautiful," Adrian murmured, and Elena wasn't sure if he meant the baby or the image itself. When he finally looked up, his dark eyes held an intensity that made her take an involuntary step backward. "She'll be lucky to have you as a mother." The compliment should have warmed her, but instead it sent an inexplicable chill down her spine. There was something proprietorial in his gaze, something that felt like more than polite interest in a patient's pregnancy. "We should go," Elena said, suddenly desperate to leave this space that felt increasingly claustrophobic. "I have everything I need." But Adrian didn't move. He was studying the framed photo of her and Marcus now, his expression unreadable. "He has no idea what he's lost," he said finally, echoing the words he'd spoken in front of the hotel. Adrian, 6 months pregnant, and he just walked away. His voice was dangerously quiet. What kind of man abandons his child? Elena opened her mouth to correct him, to explain that the baby wasn't Marcus's, then stopped. She'd never told Adrian the complicated truth about the pregnancy's timing, how the dates didn't quite match up with when she and Marcus had been intimate, how there was a gap in her memory from the medical conference in Vancouver, where everything became foggy after the opening night reception. Her doctor had assured her that stress and exhaustion could cause confusion about conception dates, and she'd been too overwhelmed with wedding planning to question it further. "It's complicated," she said instead. "No, it's not." Adrian set the photo face down on the coffee table with deliberate finality. "A man either protects what's his or he doesn't deserve it in the first place." The possessiveness in his tone made Elena's skin prickle with unease, but before she could analyze the feeling, her phone rang. Dr. Chen again, followed immediately by a text from her colleague Sarah. "Where are you? Marcus is at the hospital looking for you. He seems pretty agitated." "Shit," Elena breathed, her heart rate spiking. The last thing she needed was Marcus making a scene at her workplace, turning her private humiliation into hospital gossip. Adrian was beside her instantly, reading over her shoulder. "We need to leave, now." The urgency in his voice galvanized her. Elena grabbed her suitcase and headed for the door, but Adrian caught her arm. "The photo," he said, nodding toward the ultrasound image still sitting on her bookshelf. "I have copies. Take it." His grip on her arm tightened slightly. "Your daughter should know her mother documented every moment of her existence." There was something almost desperate in his insistence, and Elena found herself nodding, tucking the photo into her purse before she could think too hard about why it mattered to him. Everything about this day had taken on a surreal quality, as if she were watching someone else make these choices, someone braver and more reckless than Dr. Elena Vasquez had ever been. They were halfway to the elevator when Elena heard it, Marcus's voice echoing in the stairwell, growing closer. Her blood turned to ice as his words became clear. "I know she's here. Her car's in the lot." Adrian's hand found the small of her back, steering her away from the elevator toward the emergency exit at the far end of the hall. "This way," he whispered, his voice carrying a strange note of satisfaction, as if Marcus's pursuit was somehow expected. They slipped through the fire door just as Elena heard Marcus pounding on her apartment door, his voice raised in demands and apologies that made her stomach churn. How had he gone from the man who'd proposed with tears in his eyes to someone who would chase her down and harass her when she was clearly trying to get away? "He'll give up eventually," Adrian said as they descended the emergency stairs, his tone maddeningly calm. "You don't know Marcus. I know men like him." Adrian's voice carried a cold certainty that made Elena glance at him sharply. "Bullies who mistake possession for love, who only want what they can't have." The harsh assessment of her ex-fiancé should have provoked some defense of the man she'd planned to marry, but Elena found she had none left to offer. Marcus had shown his true colors in the rain last night, and now he was proving Adrian's point by refusing to respect her obvious desire for space. They reached the parking garage, where Adrian's town car waited like a getaway vehicle. Elena threw her suitcase in the trunk and slid into the back seat, her heart still racing from their narrow escape. "Where to now?" she asked as they pulled onto the street. Adrian's smile was sharp, triumphant. "Now we disappear." The private airfield stretched before them like a portal to another world, all sleek concrete and gleaming aircraft that spoke of wealth beyond Elena's comprehension. As Adrian's town car glided past the chain-link fence toward a jet that looked more like a luxury apartment than a mode of transportation, Elena felt the first real stirrings of panic. "This is really happening," she breathed, her hands unconsciously moving to her belly where the baby shifted restlessly, as if sensing her mother's agitation. "Second thoughts?" Adrian's voice was carefully neutral, but Elena caught the tension beneath it, as if her answer mattered more than he wanted to admit. "Third and fourth thoughts." She watched ground crew members preparing the aircraft, their movements efficient and practiced. "Adrian, I don't even know where we're going. Does it matter?" The question hung between them like a challenge. 3 days ago, Elena would have said yes. Destination mattered, planning mattered, having a clear itinerary and backup plans mattered. But 3 days ago, she'd believed Marcus loved her, believed her life was on track, believed she had everything figured out. "My whole life, I've needed to know what comes next," she said slowly. "I became a doctor because I could diagnose problems and fix them. I planned my wedding 18 months in advance. I had a birth plan written before I hit my second trimester." She laughed, but it sounded hollow. "And look how well all that planning served me." Adrian's expression softened almost imperceptibly. "Sometimes the best destinations are the ones we never planned to reach." The car stopped beside the aircraft, and Elena's phone immediately began buzzing. Text after text, call after call. Marcus, her colleagues, her mother, who somehow always sensed when Elena's life was imploding despite living 3,000 miles away. The outside world demanding explanations, accountability, the return of the reliable Dr. Vasquez, who never made impulsive decisions. "They're going to think I've lost my mind," Elena said, staring at the cascade of notifications. "Have you?" She looked up to find Adrian watching her with an intensity that made her breath catch. "I don't know. Maybe. Probably." "Good." He reached across and gently took the phone from her hands. "Sanity is overrated anyway." Before Elena could protest, he powered it down completely. The sudden silence felt both liberating and terrifying. She was officially off the grid, unreachable, disappeared. No one could find her now except the man sitting beside her, and that realization sent a chill through her that had nothing to do with the October air. "Elena?" Adrian's voice seemed to come from very far away. "What is it?" She couldn't articulate the fear blooming in her chest, that she was making the same mistake with Adrian that she'd made with Marcus, trusting someone who might be showing her only the parts of himself he wanted her to see. What did she really know about him beyond what he'd chosen to reveal? He'd appeared in her ER broken and bleeding, become a patient she'd saved, and now he was her savior, but saviors could become captors so easily. The thought struck her like a physical blow. "I need to know," she said suddenly, her voice stronger than she felt, "about the accident, about why you were really on that highway, about why a billionaire was driving alone on a rainy night with no security, no assistant, nothing." Adrian went very still. "Elena." "No." She turned to face him fully, drawing on every ounce of the authority she wielded in trauma situations. "You want me to disappear with you? You want me to trust you with my life and my daughter's life? Then stop deflecting and tell me the truth." Something dangerous flickered across Adrian's features, so quickly she might have imagined it, before his expression smoothed back into careful neutrality. "Some truths are more complicated than others. Try me. I'm a doctor. I handle complicated truths for a living." The silence stretched between them, taut with tension Elena didn't fully understand. Outside, the ground crew was completing their pre-flight checks, and she realized they were minutes away from the point of no return. Once that plane left the ground, she would be entirely dependent on the man beside her, a man who couldn't or wouldn't answer a simple question about his past. "I was leaving a meeting," Adrian said finally, his voice carefully controlled. An unpleasant one. I was distracted, angry. I took a corner too fast in the rain. It sounded plausible, almost boring in its mundanity, but Elena's instincts, honed by years of reading patients who minimized symptoms or lied about drug use, screamed that he was holding something back, something important. What kind of meeting? The kind that ruins people's lives. His smile was sharp, predatory, but that's ancient history now. We're writing a new story. The way he said it made Elena's blood run cold, but before she could press further, the car door opened and Adrian was stepping out, extending his hand to her with a smile that didn't quite reach his eyes. Shall we? Elena stared at his outstretched hand, knowing that taking it would change everything irrevocably. Behind them lay Seattle, her career, her carefully constructed life. Ahead lay the unknown, guided by a man whose secrets might be darker than she could imagine. The baby kicked sharply, and Elena's hand moved protectively to her belly. Whatever choice she made now, she wasn't making it just for herself. She took his hand and stepped into the void. The private jet's interior was more opulent than Elena had imagined possible. Cream leather seats that looked like they belonged in a luxury hotel, polished wood paneling, ambient lighting that somehow made everything feel intimate and isolated at once. As they settled into seats that faced each other across a small table, Elena tried to ignore the way Adrian watched her every movement with those dark, calculating eyes. "Champagne?" he offered, already reaching for a bottle nestled in ice. "I'm pregnant," Elena reminded him, though something about his automatic offer bothered her. Had he forgotten, or was this some kind of test? Of course. Sparkling water, then. His recovery was smooth, but Elena caught the slight tightening around his eyes. I should have thought. The plane began to taxi, and Elena's last chance to change her mind disappeared with the runway lights sliding past the windows. She was committed now, airborne with a man whose half-truths felt more dangerous with every passing minute. "So, where are we going?" she asked again, accepting the crystal glass he offered. "Somewhere you can think clearly, away from Marcus, away from the hospital, away from everyone who has expectations about who Dr. Elena Vasquez should be." "That's not an answer." Adrian's smile was indulgent, patronizing in a way that made Elena's teeth clench. "Does it matter? You said yourself that planning hadn't served you well." "I said my old way of planning hadn't worked. That doesn't mean I want to be completely in the dark." Elena set her glass down harder than necessary. "I'm not a child, Adrian. I'm a physician with responsibilities, a career, a life that was falling apart before I found you in that rain." The casual dismissal hit her like a slap. "Found me? You mean when I called you for help? Did you?" Adrian's expression shifted, becoming something sharper, more predatory. "Or did I simply know where you'd be?" Elena's blood turned to ice. "What does that mean?" But Adrian was already backtracking, his lawyer's training evident in the way he smoothed over the slip. "I meant that I'd been thinking about you since our dinner. When you didn't answer my calls yesterday, I was concerned enough to drive by the hotel." It was plausible, romantic even, but the way he'd phrased it initially sent alarm bells screaming through Elena's head. She pulled out her phone, still powered off from when Adrian had taken it, and tried to turn it on. Nothing happened. "The battery must be dead," she murmured, but when she checked, the device felt wrong in her hands. Lighter somehow. "Here, use mine," Adrian offered, but when Elena looked up, his phone was nowhere in sight. Actually, perhaps this is better. A real break from everything. The panic she'd been suppressing finally broke free. "Adrian, I need to contact my hospital. I have patients, responsibilities, all handled. I spoke with Dr. Chen while you were packing. You're taking emergency leave due to stress." Elena stared at him. "You did what? I thought you'd be grateful. One less thing to worry about." "You had no right." The words came out louder than she'd intended, echoing in the aircraft's confined space. "You don't get to make decisions about my career, my life, like Marcus did?" Adrian's voice turned cold, cutting. At least I'm protecting you instead of abandoning you. The comparison stung because it held just enough truth to be devastating. But as Elena sat there, 30,000 feet above the ground with a man who was making unilateral decisions about her life, the parallel between Adrian and Marcus became terrifyingly clear. Different methods, same result. Her choices being stripped away by men who claimed to know what was best for her. I want to go back, she said quietly. That's not possible right now. The casual dismissal of her direct request sent terror shooting through Elena's system. What do you mean it's not possible? Turn the plane around. Elena, be reasonable. You were having a breakdown when I found you. You're pregnant, alone, emotionally compromised. I am not compromised. But even as she said it, Elena realized how she must look to him. Disheveled, abandoned, desperate enough to run away with a virtual stranger. I'm thinking clearly for the first time in days, and I'm telling you I want to go home. To what? Your empty apartment? The hospital where everyone's gossiping about your failed engagement? The ex-fiancé who's probably already moved on? Each word was precisely calculated to hurt, and Elena felt something inside her shatter. This wasn't rescue. This was abduction wrapped in silk and justified by her own moment of weakness. She'd been so desperate to escape her humiliation that she'd walked willingly into a cage. You planned this, she whispered, the pieces clicking together with horrible clarity. The dinner invitation, being there tonight, you planned all of it. Adrian's mask finally slipped completely, revealing something cold and possessive underneath. I saved you, Elena, from a man who didn't deserve you, from a life that was slowly killing your spirit. You should be grateful. Elena's hand moved protectively to her belly, and for the first time since discovering her pregnancy, she felt truly alone. Trapped in the sky with a man whose obsession she'd mistaken for salvation, she finally understood that sometimes the most dangerous predators were the ones who convinced you they were saving you from someone else. The silence that followed Adrian's confession stretched between them like a chasm, broken only by the drone of the jet engines carrying them further from everything Elena had ever known. She stared at him. This man she'd saved, this man who claimed to be saving her, and felt the world tilt on its axis as fragments of memory began to surface like debris from a shipwreck. Vancouver, the medical conference, the opening night reception where she'd felt so accomplished, so confident in her career, her engagement, her future. She remembered the first glass of wine, then nothing. A complete blank until waking up in her hotel room the next morning with a splitting headache and the strange taste of copper in her mouth. The conference, she whispered, her voice barely audible over the engines. You were there. Adrian's expression didn't change, but something flickered behind his eyes, a moment of calculation, of choosing which mask to wear. Elena, you were there. Her voice grew stronger, more certain. The pieces were falling into place with sickening clarity. That's why you looked familiar when they brought you into my ER. Not because you were some random billionaire I might have seen in magazines, but because I'd seen you before. She closed her eyes, forcing herself to dig deeper into that lost night. Flashes came in fragments, a man's voice speaking her name, hands that were too familiar, the sensation of being moved when she couldn't move herself. And underneath it all, a cologne she now recognized, expensive and distinctive. What did you do to me? The question came out as barely more than a breath. Adrian leaned forward, his lawyer's composure cracking slightly. You were drunk, Elena, stressed about your wedding, having doubts about Marcus. You were vulnerable, and What did you do? This time she screamed it, lunging forward in her seat until she was inches from his face. What did you do to me in Vancouver? For a moment, Adrian's mask slipped entirely, and Elena saw something monstrous underneath. Possession, obsession, the cold satisfaction of a predator who had cornered his prey. Then it was gone, replaced by his careful, concerned expression. I saved you then too, he said quietly. You were about to make a terrible mistake, marry a man who would never appreciate what he had. So I gave you a gift, a reason to doubt. a complication that would force you to see the truth about Marcus. Elena's hand flew to her belly, to the child growing inside her, and the final piece clicked into place with devastating finality. The timing that had never quite made sense. The memory gaps her doctor had attributed to stress. The way Adrian had looked at her ultrasound photo with such hungry possessiveness. "The baby," she whispered. "Our daughter," Adrian corrected, and there was something almost gentle in his voice, as if he were announcing something wonderful instead of confirming her worst nightmare. "I've been protecting both of you ever since." The world went white around the edges as Elena's medical training kicked in, cataloging symptoms, hyperventilation, acute stress response, the beginning of shock. But underneath the clinical assessment was a mother's terror so profound it threatened to tear her apart. "You drugged me. It wasn't a question anymore. You raped me." "I loved you," Adrian said, as if the words could transform his crime into something pure. "From the moment you walked into that conference room presenting your research on trauma intervention, I knew you were meant to be mine. Marcus didn't deserve you. He barely listened when you spoke, checked his phone during your presentations. But I saw your brilliance, your passion." Elena's stomach lurched, and for a moment she thought she might vomit. "So you decided to take what you wanted. I decided to give us both what we needed." Adrian's voice took on an almost evangelical fervor. "A child to bind us together, a reason for you to leave him, a future built on something real instead of that pathetic compromise of a marriage you were settling for." The casual way he spoke about orchestrating her violation, her pregnancy, the destruction of her life, sent rage coursing through Elena's system like acid. "You sick, twisted." "I'm the man who loves you enough to plan our future," Adrian interrupted, his voice turning sharp. "Who eliminated the obstacles keeping us apart. Do you think Marcus just happened to develop doubts about your pregnancy? Do you think his withdrawal was natural? I showed him what he needed to see to reveal his true nature." Elena's mind reeled. "You manipulated him too." "I freed him to show you who he really was. A weak man who would abandon you at the first sign of complexity. Better you learned that now than after years of disappointment." The scope of his manipulation was breathtaking. Adrian had orchestrated every moment of her downfall, from the violation that had conceived her daughter to the abandonment that had driven her straight into his waiting arms. And she had walked willingly into his trap, grateful for his rescue from a crisis he had created. "You're insane," she breathed. "I'm in love," Adrian replied, as if they were the same thing. The words hung in the air between them like poison, and Elena felt something fundamental shift inside her chest. Not the breaking she'd experienced when Marcus left. This was different. This was the forging of steel in fire, the crystallization of purpose from the ashes of her shattered illusions. "In love," she repeated, her voice eerily calm. The hysteria, the panic, the desperate disbelief, all of it settled into something harder, more focused. "You think love justifies rape, justifies drugging an unconscious woman, justifies destroying someone's entire life for your own gratification." Adrian's expression flickered with uncertainty at her sudden composure. "Elena, you're in shock." "I'm a trauma physician," she cut him off, her medical training providing an anchor of clarity in the storm of his revelations. "I know shock. This isn't shock, Adrian. This is recognition." She leaned back in her seat, creating distance, studying him with the same clinical detachment she used to assess critical patients. "You're a textbook predator. Everything you've done follows the pattern. Isolate the victim, create dependency, manufacture crisis to position yourself as the solution." The change in her tone seemed to unnerve him more than her earlier panic had. "You're trying to rationalize what you're feeling." "What I'm feeling is rage," Elena said conversationally. "Pure, clean rage. And something else, relief." That stopped him cold. "Relief? That my daughter will never have to wonder why her father abandoned her, because her father was never her father at all. That monster was a stranger who violated her mother and thinks that constitutes love." Elena's hand moved protectively to her belly, but the gesture felt different now, not defensive, but protective in a way that promised violence to anyone who threatened what she carried. "Do you know what I do for a living, Adrian?" His perfect composure was cracking around the edges. "You're a doctor." "I put broken people back together," Elena continued, her voice gaining strength with each word. "I take the worst moments of people's lives, and I fight to give them a future. I've seen every kind of trauma, every form of violation, every species of predator that walks the earth." She smiled, and there was nothing warm in it. "And I've watched them all fail in the end, because survivors are stronger than the people who try to break them." Adrian shifted in his seat, and for the first time since she'd known him, he looked uncertain. "Elena, you need to think about your situation." "My situation?" Elena laughed, the sound sharp as breaking glass. "You mean being trapped on a plane with my rapist?" "Oh, I'm thinking about it very clearly. I'm thinking about how you just confessed to multiple felonies. I'm thinking about how you documented your obsession by orchestrating that car accident to get close to me, because that's what happened, isn't it? You didn't just happen to crash near my hospital." The flicker in his eyes confirmed her suspicions before he could deny it. "I'm thinking about how meticulous you've been, how proud you are of your planning, the kind of pride that keeps evidence, that documents victories." Elena's mind was racing now, cataloguing every detail of his confession, every slip that revealed the scope of his crimes. "Men like you don't commit the perfect crime and then stay silent about it. You savor it, you revisit it. You're creating fantasies." "I'm profiling a perpetrator," Elena corrected. "And here's what I know about you, Adrian Cross. You're smart enough to be dangerous but too arrogant to be perfect. You left traces because you wanted to preserve your triumph. The conference, the photos you probably took, the blackmail material you used on Marcus, all of it exists somewhere, doesn't it?" Adrian's silence was answer enough. Elena felt the familiar calm that came over her in the ER when a patient was coding. That crystalline focus where everything unnecessary fell away, leaving only purpose. "You made one crucial mistake in your grand plan." "What's that?" Adrian's voice was carefully controlled, but she could hear the tension underneath. "You told me everything," Elena said simply. "You couldn't resist showing me how clever you've been, how thoroughly you orchestrated my destruction. Your ego needed me to understand the scope of your devotion." She nearly choked on the word. "But information is power, Adrian, and now I have all of yours." The plane shuddered slightly as they hit turbulence, but Elena felt steadier than she had in months. The woman who had stood broken in the rain was gone, burned away by the heat of Adrian's revelations. What remained was someone harder, more dangerous, a mother with nothing left to lose and everything to fight for. "So here's what's going to happen," Elena continued, her voice carrying the absolute authority she wielded in trauma situations. "You're going to turn this plane around. You're going to take me home. And then you're going to disappear from my life while I decide whether to destroy you quickly or slowly." For the first time since she'd known him, Adrian Cross looked genuinely afraid. Adrian's fear lasted exactly 3 seconds before his expression hardened into something Elena had never seen before, the true face beneath all his careful masks. When he smiled, it held no warmth, no pretense of charm or concern. It was the smile of a predator who had finally decided to stop pretending to be anything else. "Turn the plane around?" He laughed, a sound like breaking glass. "Elena, darling, I think you misunderstood the nature of our relationship. You don't give me orders. You never have." Elena felt ice crystallize in her veins, but she kept her voice steady. "The pilots will listen to me. They'll follow my instructions, just like they've been doing." Adrian pressed a button on the console beside his seat. "Captain Morrison?" "Yes. Everything's fine back here. Dr. Vasquez was just experiencing some anxiety about flying. Please proceed to our destination as planned." "Copy that, Mr. Cross," came the crisp reply through the intercom. Elena lunged for the button, but Adrian caught her wrist with bruising force. Up close, she could see something wild flickering behind his eyes, the barely contained violence of a man whose careful plans were being threatened. "Let me go," she demanded, but he only tightened his grip. You think you're so clever, analyzing me like one of your trauma cases, he said, his voice dropping to something soft and deadly. But you missed the most important detail, Doctor. I'm not just some common predator you can profile and defeat with superior psychology. I'm Adrian Cross. I own companies, politicians, judges. I've spent 3 years planning every aspect of our future together, and I'm not about to let you destroy it with some misguided notion of heroism. Elena tried to pull free, but his grip was stronger than she'd expected. This isn't love, Adrian. This is obsession. This is what you made me. The sudden fury in his voice made her flinch. Do you think I chose to become obsessed with a woman who was engaged to another man? Do you think I wanted to spend sleepless nights thinking about your laugh, your brilliance, the way you touched my face when you thought I was dying in that ER? His fingers pressed deeper into her wrist, and Elena bit back a gasp of pain. You saved my life, Elena. You made yourself responsible for me. And now you want to abandon me like everyone else has. The raw vulnerability underneath his rage was almost more terrifying than his threats. Elena recognized it from the ER, the desperate, cornered animal panic of someone who had convinced themselves that their delusions were reality. I saved a patient, she said carefully, trying to inject calm authority into her voice the way she would with a violent, disoriented trauma victim. That's what doctors do. It doesn't create ownership, doesn't it? Adrian's grip loosened slightly, and Elena saw her chance. She yanked her hand free and scrambled backward in her seat, putting as much distance between them as the narrow cabin would allow. Then explain why you can't stop thinking about me either. The words hit their mark because they held a grain of truth that made Elena sick. She had thought about him, the mysterious patient who'd looked at her with such intensity, who'd sent flowers and invited her to dinner, but what she'd mistaken for connection had been recognition on some primal level, her subconscious mind trying to remember a violation her conscious mind couldn't access. I don't think about you, she lied. You dreamed about me, Adrian continued, his voice taking on that same evangelical fervor from before. After Vancouver, after our night together, I know you did, because you called out my name in your sleep. Marcus told me so himself when I showed him the photographs. Elena's blood turned to Arctic slush. Photographs? Insurance, Adrian said simply, to ensure Marcus understood exactly what had happened between us. Though I'll admit, I kept copies for more personal reasons. His smile was grotesque in its satisfaction. You were so beautiful that night, Elena, so trusting, even unconscious, you responded to my touch. The clinical detachment Elena had been clinging to shattered completely. She was going to vomit, going to scream, going to tear his face apart with her bare hands. No, the thought cut through her rage like a scalpel. That's what he wants. He wants you broken, desperate, dependent. He's feeding on your horror. Elena forced herself to breathe, to think like the physician she was instead of the victim he was trying to make her. Adrian was unstable, dangerous, but he was also trapped on this plane with her. And unstable people made mistakes. Where are we going? She asked, surprised by how level her own voice sounded. The question seemed to catch him off guard. What? You said we're going to our destination. Where? Elena leaned forward slightly, projecting calm interest instead of the terror clawing at her chest. If we're going to be together, I should know where home will be. Adrian's expression shifted, uncertainty flickering across his features as he tried to gauge whether her sudden compliance was genuine. Somewhere safe. Somewhere we can start over. Somewhere without extradition treaties? Elena asked quietly. The flash of surprise in his eyes told her everything she needed to know. Adrian wasn't just kidnapping her, he was running, and that meant he wasn't as untouchable as he'd claimed. It meant he could be beaten. The realization that Adrian was vulnerable, that he was running rather than operating from a position of absolute power, sent a surge of calculated hope through Elena's system. But she couldn't let it show, not yet. How long have you been planning this? She asked, maintaining that same tone of clinical curiosity. The escape, I mean. It must have taken considerable coordination. Adrian relaxed slightly at what he perceived as acceptance. Months, ever since I realized that certain evidence might surface about our relationship. Some people lack discretion when it comes to blackmail material. Elena filed that information away. Someone had betrayed him, threatened his carefully constructed web of lies. That meant there were loose ends, people who knew the truth about what he'd done. Marcus kept records? Marcus is weak, but he's not stupid. He documented everything I showed him, thinking he could use it against me someday. Adrian's lip curled with contempt. He has no idea that his insurance policy became my liability. And now you're running before he can expose you. Elena forced herself to sound almost impressed. But where can someone like you hide? Your face is known. Your resources are tied to your identity. Money opens doors that fame closes, Adrian replied, some of his earlier confidence returning. There are places in this world where a man with sufficient funds can disappear completely, start fresh, will have new names, new lives. Our daughter will grow up speaking different languages, knowing different cultures. Elena's stomach twisted at the casual way he included her in his delusions, but she pressed on. The pilots, they're in on this? Hired professionals, very discreet, very well compensated for their silence. They believe they're helping a wealthy man protect his pregnant wife from a scandal. Adrian's smile returned, cold and calculating. The flight plan is legitimate, filed properly with all authorities. No one will question our departure until we've been gone long enough for it not to matter. How thorough, Elena murmured, though her mind was racing. Hired pilots meant mercenaries, people motivated by money rather than loyalty. If she could find the right leverage, the right pressure point. What happens if I refuse to cooperate? If I try to run when we land? Adrian's expression darkened. That would be unfortunate for everyone involved, Elena. I've invested too much in our future together to let you destroy it over misguided principles. He leaned forward, and she caught that expensive cologne again, the scent that had triggered her first recovered memory. But you're too smart to run. You know I have resources you can't match, connections you can't fight, and you know that our daughter needs a father. She needs a father, Elena agreed quietly, not a rapist who calls himself one. The words hung between them, like a blade. Adrian's carefully constructed composure cracked again, revealing the volatility beneath. You keep using that word, as if what happened between us was violence instead of love. What would you call it? Elena challenged, abandoning caution for direct confrontation. You drugged me. You violated me while I was unconscious. You impregnated me without consent and then manipulated my entire life to cover your crimes. What part of that sounds like love to you? The part where I've spent every day since then devoted to protecting you, Adrian snarled. Where I've eliminated threats to your happiness, removed obstacles to our future together. Where I've built an empire that can give our daughter everything she could ever want or need. Built on rape, Elena said flatly. Built on lies. Built on the systematic destruction of my autonomy and choice. Adrian stood abruptly, his control finally snapping. In the confined space of the cabin, he seemed enormous, threatening. Elena's training kicked in, assess the threat, identify escape routes, protect vital areas. But there was nowhere to run on a plane 30,000 feet in the air. You want to talk about choice? He demanded, looming over her. You chose to save my life. You chose to care for me, to touch me with those gentle hands, to speak to me with that voice that could heal anything. You made me love you, Elena. You don't get to decide that was wrong after the fact. I was doing my job, Elena said, forcing herself not to cower. The same job I've done for thousands of other patients who didn't interpret basic medical care as romantic invitation. But I wasn't just another patient, was I? Adrian's voice dropped to a whisper that raised every hair on Elena's arms. You felt it too, that connection, that recognition. It's why you couldn't forget me, why you dreamed about me, why you kept that photograph from the hospital fundraiser where we're standing together. Elena's blood froze. I threw that photograph away. You tried to, But you took it out of the trash 3 times before you finally left it in your desk drawer. Adrian's smile was triumphant and terrible. I know everything about you, Elena. Every habit, every weakness, every secret. I've been watching you for 3 years. The scope of his surveillance, his violation of her privacy, hit her like a physical blow. But beneath the horror was something else, a growing fury that burned brighter with each revelation. He had stolen everything from her, her autonomy, her memories, her choices, her future. But he had made one crucial error in his obsessive planning. He had told her everything. 3 years, Elena repeated, her voice carrying a deadly calm that made Adrian take an involuntary step backward. 3 years of surveillance, 3 years of planning, 3 years of systematically dismantling my life, piece by piece. She rose from her seat slowly, deliberately, her movements controlled, despite the rage building inside her, like a nuclear reactor approaching critical mass. Do you know what that makes you, Adrian? Elena. Sloppy, she cut him off, her tone clinical and precise, obsessively, fatally sloppy. Because men like you can never resist the grand gesture, the dramatic reveal. You had to tell me everything, didn't you? You had to make sure I understood the scope of your devotion. Adrian's confidence flickered. You're in shock. You're not thinking clearly. I'm thinking more clearly than I have in months. Elena began moving toward the front of the cabin, forcing Adrian to back up as she advanced. 3 years of evidence, Adrian. 3 years of documented stalking, harassment, conspiracy. The car accident you orchestrated, that involved insurance fraud, reckless endangerment. The drugging in Vancouver, that's sexual assault in the 1st degree, not to mention whatever designer compounds you used that required pharmaceutical connections to obtain. No one will believe Marcus's documentation that you just admitted exists. The photographs you showed him, the blackmail material. Elena's laugh was sharp as surgical steel. You're right that money opens doors, but it also creates paper trails. Every bribe, every payoff, every hired professional, they all leave digital footprints. And you've been bleeding evidence for 3 years because you couldn't resist savoring your victories. Adrian's back hit the cabin door as Elena continued her relentless advance. For the first time, she was seeing him as he truly was. Not the polished billionaire or the charming benefactor, but a cornered predator whose carefully constructed world was crumbling. You don't understand the forces you're dealing with. Forces? Elena's voice rose to match the fury, finally breaking free of her clinical restraint. You think you're some unstoppable force? You're a pathetic obsessive who convinced himself that rape was romance and stalking was courtship. You're not a master manipulator. You're a textbook case study in narcissistic delusion with violent tendencies. She was close enough now to see the sweat beading on Adrian's forehead, to smell the fear beneath his expensive cologne. The man who had seemed so powerful, so untouchable, was revealed as nothing more than a predator faced with prey that refused to stay broken. The pilots, Elena continued, her voice dropping to a whisper more terrifying than any scream, hired professionals motivated by money. What do you think they'll choose when federal agents offer them immunity in exchange for testimony? When they realize they're accessories to kidnapping, sexual assault, conspiracy? She smiled, and there was nothing human in it. How much did you pay them, Adrian? More than their freedom is worth. They're professionals. They won't. They're mercenaries, Elena corrected. And mercenaries have a very simple code. Save yourself first. The moment this plane lands, the moment law enforcement starts asking questions, they'll throw you to the wolves without hesitation. Adrian's hand moved toward the intercom button, but Elena was faster. She grabbed his wrist, not with the desperate strength of a victim, but with the practiced precision of a physician who had restrained violent patients in the ER. Her grip found the pressure point that sent shooting pain up his arm, and Adrian gasped. You want to make another call to the cockpit? Elena asked conversationally. Go ahead, but consider this. I'm a respected physician with no criminal record, pregnant and obviously distressed. You're a billionaire with documented enemies and a history of aggressive business practices. If I start screaming that you're kidnapping me, which one of us do you think those hired professionals will believe? The wild desperation in Adrian's eyes told her he was finally beginning to understand the trap he'd built for himself. His obsessive need to control every detail, to explain every move, had transformed his victim into his nemesis. "You saved my life," he whispered, his voice breaking with genuine anguish. "You can't destroy me. Not after everything I've done for you." Elena leaned closer, her voice carrying the absolute finality of a death pronouncement. "I saved a patient. But the man I saved died in that hospital bed, and what crawled out was something else entirely, something that violated my body, destroyed my relationship, and thinks it can claim ownership of my child." She released his wrist and stepped back, her decision crystallizing with surgical clarity. "So here's what's going to happen, Adrian. You're going to tell those pilots to turn this plane around. You're going to return me to Seattle. And then you're going to pray that federal prison is the worst thing that happens to you." Adrian stared at her, seeing perhaps for the first time not his obsession made flesh, but a woman transformed into something as dangerous as he had ever been. And finally, Adrian Cross began to understand what it meant to be afraid. The silence stretched between them like a taut wire ready to snap. Elena watched Adrian's face cycle through expressions: desperation, rage, calculation, and finally something that chilled her more than his fury: acceptance. "You're right," he said quietly, straightening his jacket with trembling hands. "I should turn the plane around, return you to Seattle, face the consequences of my mistakes." Elena's triumph wavered. Something in his tone, the sudden shift from cornered animal to resigned compliance, triggered every instinct she'd developed in the ER. Patients, who went suddenly calm after violent episodes, weren't surrendering. They were planning. "Adrian, you want to know what I'm going to do?" He moved away from the cabin door, but not toward the intercom. Instead, he walked to the window, gazing out at the endless expanse of clouds below. "I'm going to tell the pilots to turn around. I'm going to confess everything to the authorities. I'm going to accept that the woman I love, the woman I saved from a mediocre life with a weak man, would rather see me destroyed than give us a chance." Elena's skin crawled at the word "us," but she forced herself to stay focused. "Good, that's the right choice. But first," Adrian continued, his reflection in the window showing that same terrible smile, "I need to ask you something. A hypothetical question, if you will. Adrian, just make the call. What happens to a pregnancy when the mother experiences severe trauma at 30,000 feet?" He turned from the window, and Elena saw that the desperate obsession in his eyes had crystallized into something far more dangerous: the absolute clarity of a man with nothing left to lose. Rapid decompression, oxygen deprivation, extreme stress. Even if the mother survives, what are the odds the child would? Elena's blood turned to ice. "What are you talking about?" "You've painted such a clear picture of my future, Dr. Vasquez. Prison, disgrace, the loss of everything I've built. But you've forgotten one crucial detail." Adrian moved toward her slowly, deliberately. "If I'm going to lose everything anyway, what exactly do I have left to lose?" The pieces fell into place with horrifying clarity. Elena's hand instinctively moved to her stomach as she understood the full scope of his madness. "You wouldn't. The baby is yours too." "Is it?" Adrian's voice carried a philosophical detachment that terrified her more than his rage had. "You've made it abundantly clear that this child was conceived through violence, not love, that I have no right to claim her as mine. So what is she, really, but evidence of my crimes?" Elena backed away, her mind racing through possibilities. The emergency oxygen masks, the communication systems, the distance to the cockpit door. But Adrian was between her and every escape route, and they both knew it. "You said you loved me," she whispered, trying to find any remaining humanity in his eyes. "If you love me, you won't hurt our daughter." "Love," Adrian repeated, tasting the word like poison. "You've taught me something about love today, Elena. It's conditional, fragile, It can be destroyed by inconvenient truths and moral posturing. So perhaps it's time I learned to live without it. He moved toward the emergency controls panel, and Elena finally understood his plan. Not murder-suicide, something far more calculated, an accident, a tragic decompression incident that would kill the evidence of his crimes while leaving him free to disappear into whatever new identity he'd prepared. "Adrian, wait!" Elena's voice cracked with genuine terror. "Please, think about this. Think about what you're doing." "I am thinking," he replied, his hand hovering over the panel. "I'm thinking about prison walls and criminal trials and watching the woman I love testify about how I destroyed her life. I'm thinking about growing old as a cautionary tale instead of the man who saved you from mediocrity." His fingers traced the emergency release. "But mostly, I'm thinking about how peaceful it will be when the thinking finally stops." Elena made her choice in that crystalline moment of absolute clarity. Not the choice between fight and flight. There was nowhere to run and no way to overpower him. Not the choice between self-preservation and heroism. They were 30,000 feet from any rescue. She chose sacrifice. "I'll stay," she said quietly. Adrian's hands stilled. "What?" "I'll stay with you. Whatever new life you've planned, wherever you want to go, I won't fight you anymore." The words tasted like ashes, but Elena forced them out with steady conviction. "Just don't hurt her. Please, she's innocent in all this." The obsession flickered back to life in Adrian's eyes, warring with his death wish. Elena pressed her advantage, hating herself for every word. "You were right about the connection between us. I did dream about you. I did keep that photograph." She stepped closer, watching his hand move away from the controls. "Maybe we could try again, start over somewhere new, just the three of us." Adrian stared at her, and Elena saw the moment he chose to believe the lie. The moment her daughter's life was purchased with her freedom. The moment victory revealed its true cost. Adrian's face transformed as hope rekindled in his eyes. Desperate, hungry hope that made Elena's skin crawl even as relief flooded through her. His hand fell away from the emergency controls completely, and she allowed herself one shaky breath. "You mean it," he whispered, stepping toward her with the reverence of a man approaching a shrine. "You'll give us a chance, a real chance." "Yes," Elena forced the word out, each letter a small death. "But I need time to process everything, to grieve what I'm leaving behind." She placed her hand on her stomach, the gesture both protective and performative. "She's going to be born into this new life. I need to make peace with that." Adrian nodded eagerly, his volatile mood swinging back toward the manic obsession she'd seen in his hospital room months ago. Of course, you need time. We have time now, all the time in the world." He moved to the intercom, his movements jerky with renewed energy. "I'll tell them to continue to our destination. The house there is perfect. Secluded, beautiful. You'll love it." Elena watched him pick up the handset, her mind already 3 steps ahead. The pilots were hired professionals, motivated by money and self-preservation. If they truly believed they were helping a wealthy man protect his pregnant wife, they would follow his orders without question. But hired loyalty was a fragile thing. "Before you do that," Elena said carefully, "I need to ask you something." Adrian paused, the handset halfway to his ear. "Anything. When we land, when we start this new life, what happens to the people who know the truth? Marcus, the pilots, anyone else you had to involve in making this happen?" The question hung between them, and Elena watched Adrian's expression shift as he processed the implications. She was asking about witnesses, about loose ends, about the practical realities of disappearing completely. His answer would tell her everything she needed to know about whether she was buying time or signing death warrants. "They'll be handled," Adrian said finally, his tone carrying an ominous finality. "Marcus has already been discredited. The pilots will be well compensated for their discretion. As for anyone else," he shrugged with casual indifference that made Elena's blood freeze, "money can solve most problems. For the rest, there are other solutions." Other solutions. Elena forced her expression to remain neutral, even as horror churned in her stomach. He was talking about eliminating witnesses, people whose only crime had been crossing paths with his obsession. "I see," she managed. "Very thorough. I've had 3 years to plan for every contingency," Adrian said proudly, completely missing the revulsion in her voice. "Nothing has been left to chance. Our future is secure." Elena nodded slowly, her mind crystallizing around a terrible new understanding. She hadn't just been buying time for herself and her daughter, she'd been inadvertently confirming Adrian's plans to destroy anyone who could connect him to his crimes. The pilots who thought they were helping a wealthy couple disappear were likely marked for elimination the moment they landed. Marcus, already broken by Adrian's manipulation, was probably living on borrowed time. "Adrian," she said quietly, "what if there was another way?" His hand tightened on the intercom handset. "What do you mean? What if you didn't have to hurt anyone else? What if we could start fresh without leaving bodies behind?" Elena chose her words carefully, walking a razor's edge between manipulation and honesty. "You said you loved me. Could you do that for me? Find solutions that don't involve more violence?" For a moment, something almost human flickered in Adrian's eyes. Uncertainty, perhaps even shame. But it was quickly overwhelmed by the calculating coldness she'd come to recognize as his true nature. "Elena, you don't understand the complexities involved. I understand that I can't build a life with you if it's founded on other people's graves," Elena interrupted, putting steel in her voice. "I understand that our daughter will grow up asking questions about the past, and I won't be able to look her in the eye if I know what we did to protect our secret." Adrian stared at her, and Elena could practically see the war raging in his mind. His obsession with her versus his need to eliminate threats. His desire to possess her completely versus his recognition that she was drawing moral lines he couldn't cross without losing her cooperation. "You're asking me to take enormous risks," he said finally. "I'm asking you to choose between love and control," Elena replied. "Between the woman you claim to love and the empire you built on her suffering." The silence stretched between them again, but this time Elena felt the shift in the cabin's atmosphere. Adrian was no longer holding all the cards. She had found his weakness, his desperate need for her willing participation in his delusion, and she was using it against him. She was using his love as a weapon. The thought should have filled her with triumph, but instead, Elena felt only a hollow exhaustion as she waited to see which version of Adrian Cross would emerge victorious. The hollow exhaustion settled deeper into Elena's bones as she watched Adrian wrestle with demons she'd helped awaken. In the sterile quiet of the cabin, 30,000 feet above the world she might never see again, Elena felt the weight of her transformation settling around her shoulders like a surgeon's coat. Familiar, necessary, and forever changed. When Adrian finally spoke, his voice carried the defeat of a man who'd lost a war he didn't know he was fighting. "The pilots will be compensated and relocated, not eliminated. Marcus can keep his pathetic life. But Elena," his eyes found hers, still burning with obsession but tempered now by something resembling respect. "This is the last concession I make. After this, we disappear completely, no looking back." Elena nodded, knowing it wasn't a concession at all. It was a strategic retreat, but it was also a victory, purchased with pieces of her soul she'd never get back. "I understand." Adrian lifted the handset again, and this time Elena didn't stop him. She watched him give coordinates to the cockpit, watched him arrange their disappearance with the same clinical precision she once reserved for trauma surgeries. The irony wasn't lost on her. They were both healers in their own minds, both convinced they were saving lives even as they carved away pieces of themselves. 6 hours to landing," Adrian announced after ending the call. "You should rest. The house has everything prepared for the baby, nursery, medical equipment, anything you might need." "Thank you." The words came automatically, a physician's bedside manner applied to her captor. But as Adrian settled into the seat across from her, Elena found herself studying his face with new eyes. Not the eyes of a victim cataloguing her abuser's moods, but the analytical gaze of someone who had stared into an abyss and mapped its contours. She thought of the woman who had walked out of Seattle General 3 months ago, Dr. Elena Vasquez, emergency physician, fiercely independent, armored in professional competence and personal isolation. That woman had believed in clear moral lines, in heroes and villains, in the simple narrative that good people made good choices and bad people made bad ones. That woman was gone. In her place sat someone harder, more complex, someone who could weaponize love, who could lie with surgical precision, who could smile at a monster while calculating the exact pressure points needed to bring him to his knees. Someone who understood that survival wasn't about maintaining moral purity, but about choosing which pieces of yourself you could afford to sacrifice. "Elena?" Adrian's voice pulled her from her reflection. "You're very quiet." "Just thinking about the future," she replied. And it wasn't entirely a lie. She was thinking about the future, about the woman her daughter would grow up to know, about the stories she would tell about these months, about the person she would have to become to survive whatever came next. The cabin fell into an uneasy quiet, broken only by the steady hum of engines carrying them toward an uncertain destination. Elena closed her eyes, but sleep didn't come. Instead, she found herself mentally composing the letter she would never write, to Marcus, to her colleagues at the hospital, to the woman she used to be. "I disappeared on a Tuesday," she thought. "Not in body, that came later, but in spirit. I looked into the eyes of a man who claimed to love me and realized that love could be the most dangerous thing of all when it came from someone who didn't understand the difference between devotion and possession." Her hand moved to her stomach, feeling the subtle movements of her daughter. "Their daughter," she corrected herself, the possessive pronoun tasting like medicine. This child would grow up knowing only the version of Elena that emerged from this cabin, the mother forged in trauma and tempered in impossible choices. "I was thinking," Adrian said suddenly, his voice careful and measured, "about names. For the baby." Elena opened her eyes, meeting his gaze across the narrow aisle. For a moment, she saw not the calculating predator but the broken man underneath. Someone so desperate for connection that he'd convinced himself kidnapping was courtship, that control was love, that possession was partnership. "What names did you have in mind?" she asked, because this too was part of her new reality, playing house with a madman while plotting escape routes that might not exist. As Adrian began describing nurseries and futures and the life he'd constructed in his mind, Elena listened with the patience of someone who had learned that survival sometimes meant wearing the mask your captor needed to see. But beneath that mask, behind eyes that had seen too much and adapted too well, the heart of Dr. Elena Vasquez beat with quiet, steady determination. She was returning to the world, but not as the woman who'd left it. She was someone new now, someone dangerous in her own right, someone who understood that sometimes the only way to heal was to first learn how to wound. The transformation was complete. The return was just beginning. #Chapter 18, The New Beginning. 2 years later, Dr. Elena Cross stood in the garden of their Tuscan villa, watching her daughter take tentative steps across the stone pathway. Sophia, they had settled on the name during that long flight, when Adrian's voice had carried desperate hope and Elena had learned to turn survival into an art form, moved with the fearless determination of